So with that, we've got two people who are going to take us actually deeper into the technology. As a part of the session today, our goal is not just to provide a high level view, but as you saw in not just a high level view and just not cover the policies, but then get into the technologies. When we had Tom and Kamil introduce ideas, now going deeper into real live demos, showing you exactly how we did it. And now we're going to have two experts in software development, one on the automotive side, one on the traffic management side, to take us deeper into the technology, give you insight. How are these systems working? How are they being put together with that? So with that, we've got two people, one from Mobility Insight, Bob. If you're there, you can turn on your camera, and Dave, if you're there. All right. So Bob, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do at Mobility Insight, and then we'll go to Dave at Droid, and then what we're going to do in this session is actually get a little bit more technical. And for those of you on chat, like our other panels, these guys are experts, so feel free to take advantage of their time and ask questions. So Bob, a little bit about what you do at your company, and then maybe you could share some insights from a software perspective, and then to you, Dave.
Sure. So Bob Siegel, I am the North American PMO and VP of Business Development, and we're a startup, so I'm really any title I want to call myself. What we are at Mobility Insight, we provide artificial intelligence powered what we call traffic management as a service. And so it's very relevant to a lot of what we're talking about here, because this is around the data security, and we're a very data centric company. What we're basically doing is we're taking in data from all over the traffic network. So we're not just looking at this from an intersection or a corridor, but you think about traffic flow. Traffic flow is really a network flow problem. So we are looking at it from that perspective, and we take in, therefore, huge amounts of data so that we can bring and fuse the different data types together to give traffic managers awareness of a situation across the entire transportation network. And then on top of that, we apply algorithms that allow us to predict problems, potential bottlenecks or saturation, things like that. And from that, we also assist the traffic managers in relieving traffic situations, or even preventing them before they begin. So we're pulling up predefined traffic plans. And all of this is a tremendous amount of data, but yet we don't use personalized data. So we're not involved in putting that at risk, and it's a huge benefit that brings us that. And so with that, I'll go back to you, and you can go to Dave or ask me any questions that you want.
Well, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I've got a bunch of questions that have come across on chat and that other speakers have brought us. So Dave, a little bit about yourself and Nextdroid.
Yeah, so Nextdroid is trying to do something pretty unique. We have been working for quite a few years actually with really big automotive companies, actually most of the big automotive companies, to provide a way for them to really measure the effectiveness of their ADAS and self-driving systems. Because the basic idea is, right, if you can't measure it, it's hard to improve it. And there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of hype associated with various car companies, declaring that they have these safe systems. When we actually look at the data that has come out recently, it's not looking good. Meaning the ADAS systems aren't actually improving safety, which is kind of crazy, right? Because people assume that they would, but there's fights for control between the human and the system. There's all kinds of instances where the systems don't really work as they're supposed to. And often right when the human would most need their help, for instance, when bright sunlight is streaming into the human's eyes, the car says, hey, good luck, we're not participating in this, right? And so the human's like, well, wait, this is exactly when I wanted your help. And now, it isn't there, right? But all of what we've learned is now being kind of put to a new use. And this is what I wanted to tell you about. So we're collecting all this ground truth, and in real time, we're extracting every one of the other vehicles, pedestrians, objects in the environment. We're also doing this sort of what I like to call micro positioning to get really, 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 really solid ground truth on where the vehicle actually is. And then we're also looking at lanes, right? So we're turning the lanes into a polynomial in real time with tremendous accuracy. And so it occurred to me about a year ago that since we have all this data, and we have the lanes, we have the relative position of all the vehicles around us, we can actually calculate safety in a way that has never been done before. And we can do it in a totally cross-cutting way, where whether you're driving, a 1994, Ford 150 pickup truck, or whether you're driving, a Tesla, we can actually tell human performance, vehicle performance, and we can also look at the relative complexity and risk in the environment around us. Because at the end of the day, how you move in relation to your peers is the most critical thing. In fact, it's the most critical aspect, not only for safety, but for everything we're trying to do, right? Like, I've made the argument for a while, if you want a smart car, you better first have a smart ecosystem. And the most important aspect of a smart ecosystem is this swarm intelligence, right? If I have the smartest car in the world and it pulls up to the Lincoln Tunnel in New York, and that Lincoln Tunnel is completely backed up with traffic, there's no way for that smart car to think its way through the traffic. It's not possible. So at the end of the day, we need not only the individual intelligence, and we need not only what Bob is doing with traffic control and traffic flow, which is great, but we also need the sort of peer-to-peer interaction. And so with the insurance companies recently, we've gained tremendous traction, right? Because a lot of the insurance companies like State Farm, Progressive, Allstate, Geico, they all have a little dongle that they put in the cars, and this generally measures whether you go over the speed limit, and it measures hard acceleration and hard braking. The challenge is turning that into a predictive value, meaning that it can actually predict safety outcomes, which interestingly, it cannot. Because at the end of the day, if you're speeding on a Utah freeway and there are no other cars, it's not dangerous. It's not even slightly dangerous until you get to go extremely fast. You see what I mean? On the other hand, you'd be going under the speed limit, very smoothly traveling through LA traffic and cutting people off, causing them to slam on their brakes, and dramatically affecting the flow of traffic, congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, all the stuff we really care about. So at the end of the day, not surprisingly, safety and ultimately congestion is all about nearest neighbor interaction, or what I like to call relative motion.
Great.
So one of the things we want to do is bring that into the mix, bring that into the conversation.
So just want to go to something that actually both of you have kind of mentioned, and I just want to kind of explore that, and that is data privacy. One of the things, if I look at the work both of you are doing, Bob kind of at the city level or at the state level where he can see a car moving, and of course he's doing it, for all the right reasons to make sure the cars are moving at the at a large scale. And the work, Dave, you're doing it within the vehicle itself. We have this notion that these vehicles and these systems now know everything about people. They know who the person is, where they're going, who they're meeting, at a scale that actually has never happened before, actually in human history. I mean, for those who are worried about, foreign governments who monitor stuff, that this is actually beyond their wildest dreams of what's possible. How can we have continual growth in intelligence, yet safeguards to make sure that that intelligence is not misused by a criminal? So a thing that's actually happened with webcams, not even autonomous vehicles, criminals break into webcams that have the same password just to find out when you've left your home. Now criminals could figure out where you are to see if your home is empty. I just use that as an example, but there's dozens more of misuse. And then if we get into the political and criminal aspect, seeing when people gather and then taking advantage. So Bob, do you have any thoughts, both of you, on the safeguards we need?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to be done here. And I think, when you start with from a security perspective, you have different uses for different types of data. So we can take something very similar to what we saw in the previous demonstration, a view from a camera. We don't have to know that Junaid is in that vehicle. We just have to know that there is a vehicle there and be able to detect speed and uh, uh, direction and that sort of information. There are other aspects of the environment where they do need information. For example, if we go into say a congestion pricing application, or what Dave was just talking about with the dongles and the vehicles for insurance purposes. And one of the great things as we get to 5G is you'll have different channels, different slices for that sort of data. But I think that we really, as an industry, have to do a couple things. We have got to try to develop solutions that don't require that we capture that data. At the very least, process it at the edge. Okay, so that we're not bringing it back into the cloud. But even before that, don't get it if you don't need it. That's number one. When you start also getting into the privacy aspects and you bring that in, one of the things I think that we have to recognize in this industry, and this has to do with every one of us on this call, is remember that the trust, the driver trust, the public trust is really in fact like an asset that all of us carry on our balance sheets, every business or every government organization. It's a very fragile asset, and we have to look at it that way and protect it in that way. But I'm afraid that it's in some cases we treat it more like in economics, they call it the tragedy of the commons, where too many people take advantage of a common asset to use it for their own good, and that depletes the value of that asset. And I think we have to be very careful that we're not going there. So, it Moby, one of the things we're doing, like we're looking at right now, a program where we're providing origin and destination data. So this is through origin and destination matrices. And so you break this up into individual zones, okay? And in most cases, when you look at an origin and destination zone, you have so many vehicles there that when you anonymize and aggregate the data, everything is fine, okay? But in cases where the zones have a small number of vehicles, we've developed algorithms that help us zoom out from that zone. So you, Junaid, remain hidden. There's nothing there, but we can still get the data out of that. And it's hard to do. Okay, it's not fun. I'm really only 25 years old. I had a full head of hair before we started working on that. Okay, it's hard work. But you know what? It is so important, because without this, it's not only that we don't have these businesses, we don't get the environmental improvements. We don't get to save the lives that so many of us really want to be a part of saving and preventing these accidents if we don't have that public trust.
Yeah, Dave, how do we keep our cars from spying on us, especially given your fantastic software, which we'll talk to another car. And so, do you have any thoughts on privacy and also the misuse of this data by cyber attackers who break into it?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would say at a high level is, we want to steer clear of centralized approaches, right? And so I'm a big believer in swarm intelligence, as I was mentioning before, which is going to pay us big dividends, not only because it's just better from an engineering perspective, but also because it really diminishes the possibility of bad actors, to tap in and use that data and from a centralized location. So in other words, like everything we're doing is really kind of relative and peer-to-peer. And I think that's an important distinction. It's actually marvelous that when we did all this stuff with the DoD, right, when we were doing essentially ground truth for landmine detection, which, believe it or not, is very similar to what we're doing now, we had to spend a lot of energy, about 7 years, sort of convincing the Department of Defense that even though all of their requirements were written in global terms, they really didn't need to know where the landmine was on the face of the earth, right? What they needed to understand was where they were in relation to the mine. You see what I mean? And the way I explained this was like, would you want to walk through a minefield using GPS to guide you? No, you would not. You absolutely would not. What you need to know is your relative position to that mine. And reporting everything in global coordinates is wrong. Like, it is wrong. It is a bad, wrong thing to do, and it's going to produce the wrong system, the wrong outcome. So the problem is that we convinced everyone over the last 20 years that somehow GPS and the idea of localizing off satellites in space is how they could orchestrate everything. And of course, GPS is wonderful and we're doing it, and I'm not saying anything against GPS, but in cities, it's off by 30 meters a lot of the time. And so for any kind of safety critical enterprise, it's a big issue, right? And so how we calculate positioning should be swarm-based. How we distribute data should be swarm-based. In my thinking, we don't necessarily need to know who's in that car so much as we need to understand the impact of your driving on the roadway. And again, not because we want to necessarily give tickets or anything like that, but more just because we want to provide actionable feedback, right? Yeah. So for me, it's more about what I like to call actionable feedback than it is about, enforcement or penalties or anything like that, right? And ideally, if you do focus on the relative peer-to-peer element and you don't necessarily pump that data into the cloud, I think the public will see it as a tremendous benefit and not as a way of controlling them or penalizing them. In fact, kind of like my vision of the future is you'll never get pulled over by a cop again for speeding. That whole idea needs to go away. It's preposterous, right? It's causing us all kinds of societal problems. It's not helping. It's a really poor sample set, and frankly, it's not really making anything safer or better. So imagine a system that is more based on what I would call meaningful feedback.
So, actually, Dave, you said something interesting that had never occurred to me, but now that you said it, it's kind of obvious. We are having so many problems with law enforcement, people pulling people over for traffic violations in America. And, just when you said it, I just realized that, if that was fully automated, so the system didn't even know who it was, and there's no notion of bias, that could be kind of revolutionary in terms of that these smart transportations just aren't just about technology, that they could actually have a societal impact that actually we never thought about. And that's actually a kind of very interesting thing of, smart transportation. So, as we wrap up this panel, I have a question for both of you, and it's in the spirit of the Indiana 5G zone. A lot of what we do here is we focus on making lives better. And we also focus on generating income for companies and the state, as we are the Indiana 5G zone paid for by the state of Indiana. A thought about from both of you, there's been ideas about dynamic toll allocation to let cars move faster, because these systems could look at traffic and see if they can create a premium lane during congestion points. Also to help people park their car quicker so they don't go around the block unnecessarily and just go right to the spot. And maybe you buy the spot right on your phone so that you know exactly where to go to. A closing thought on both of you on how smart transportation systems could actually both simultaneously provide value to the driver and provide kind of new revenue for the city and state. Bob, you first.
All right, so excellent. So I'll give you a couple thoughts on this. So first of all, what we have to recognize is that we're coming up on opportunities where there's a lot of chance for vehicle cooperation, collaboration among vehicles, much as Dave's been talking about. And one of the big benefits here is that, we know as traffic managers, we know that vehicles that are moving at steady speeds flow much more smoothly. They cover much more ground. Our roads get much greater throughput as a result of this. So I think that one of the big areas that our traffic management systems can get to is to provide guidance to connected and eventually autonomous vehicles that says to them, okay, go at this speed, stay in this lane, remember that you will get there faster, and guiding vehicles very steadily through. So, if you stop suddenly, you get this back propagating wave that slows traffic back for miles. Well, let's get away from that. Okay. The lane changes and things like that, if we can move people through more effectively, I think that's going to be a benefit. One of my personal favorites also, and this is a little sci-fi-ish perhaps, but I guess from a guy who has a Jetsons background, maybe not so much, but there are a lot of companies that are working in very small vehicles, miniature vehicles. And I think with 5G capabilities for V to X and V to I communications, we're going to get to a point where very small individual vehicles are going to be able to communicate, to platoon, okay, to use the type of communications, in fact, that Dave is describing here, and be able to move in groups, much like trains, and that is going to bring about a whole new form of public transportation where I'm using something that is AV most of the way, level 3, level 4, maybe ultimately level 5, that's electrified, okay, not using gas, much more efficient. Maybe it only goes 40, 45 miles an hour, but it's doing that steadily the whole way. And it's also solving the first and last mile problem that public transportation has. And it's my vehicle, so it's comfortable and private and I can work in it, unlike what I can do on a bus or a train. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think we're heading towards things like that with that kind of cooperation. And our type of systems can enable those to move within traffic much more easily, much more safely. So that's my thought.
Great. And then Dave, your kind of last thought to you on a kind of a win-win, both for the driver and the state of Indiana and other states as well.
Well, I do think that states right now have a kind of amazing opportunity, right? They could decide to be data driven and they could decide to actually make everything like people's contributions to the state based on the actual measured impact of their driving, right? It makes sense. I mean, right now we're sort of at the other end of the spectrum. And investments right now into 5G, into what I like to call enhanced positioning, just essentially better positioning, better traffic flow, better applications for smart parking. This will have a big impact, but it all really stems from having the right data pipeline. And so, once you have the data, you can create what I call feedback loops. And these feedback loops can really help the city and the state make better decisions. And ideally, we can provide continuous feedback, meaning, to kind of clarify a point I made earlier, right now you get pulled over by a policeman every once, in a long time, hopefully more like several years, right? So that's a very, very small sample set on your driving. You see what I'm saying? The actual periodicity, we'll just say, is very, very, very low. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what I would call continuous feedback, right? Where we're always looking at, the nature of your driving and the impact that it's having on the roadway. So instead of just charging people, sort of like for going on a particular road during rush hour, I'm looking much more broadly. Indiana could actually look at, the impact of your driving all the time, right? And this is sort of the future. It's going to happen. It just makes sense. The way in which it happens, humbly, I don't know. But I do know that actionable feedback and continuously applying it is going to give you a better result, right? That is sort of the definition of intelligence.
Great. Thanks both of you for that. I really enjoyed the session. I learned a lot. I think this notion of having computers and machine learning systems give tickets versus having police officers pull people over and create something that's unfortunately turning into confrontational probably is a win that probably worth exploring in a future session just by itself as the kind of society benefits. So thanks to both of you for an exciting session.